The amygdala. It's the thing that activates fight or flight responses, and it's responsible for emotional processes in the brain. The amygdala is an almond-shaped bunch of neurons that's located in the temporal lobe or in the middle of the brain. There's actually two of them, like right behind the eyes in the temporal region of the brain. It's in front of the hippocampus. All of these neurons are wired together to alert people of danger when it occurs. But the issue with anxiety is that the amygdala has sometimes learned that things that are not actually dangerous can be a trigger for anxiety. Just because a couple of negative experiences that occur, those triggers can wreak havoc on our life. For example, most people pet dogs and think dogs are very friendly. But if one time when you were a child, a dog bit you or bit somebody, their amygdala may associate that experience as a traumatic experience and rewire their neurons to always associate the dogs as dangerous. It'll always associate any dog as dangerous if that occurs, which is not necessarily true because dogs are typically friendly. The amygdala basically processes raw information and sends that to the thalamus, which takes time to process. You see, there are two ways that the body can sense danger. One is this method, where it gets raw information. An example of this is walking into a dark room. Let's say you walk into a dark room, you see a shadow of something in the room, like a standing fan. And immediately, it processes that as a burglar. And the feeling of adrenaline and cortisol course through the body. Later, you realize it was just a standing fan. Oh my God, I got tricked. That realization later is when the information gets sent to the cortex to get processed. The second way the amygdala can get information is directly from the cortex, which is the actual thing that we think that is the brain, the wavy part, which actually involves more of a logical process. The cortex is part of the brain that many people always think is the actual brain. It's that wavy, squiggly, pink region that you see in pictures. We'll talk more about the cortex in later videos, but basically, the cortex is where the thought-based anxiety comes from. Thinking about something, worrying about something, analyzing something negatively is all cortex-based. Both raw processing and thinking-based anxiety needs to be rewired by training the amygdala, so neuroplasticity. Rewiring the circuits and practicing mindful thinking in positive ways are all needed to rewire your neurons. There's more to it, but that's what needs to happen in a nutshell. For example, just to rewire the circuits, it could involve hundreds of techniques like exercise, alternative healing, meditation, certain foods, certain therapies. The list just goes on. So either the thalamus gives raw information straight to the amygdala and causes anxiety, or the thalamus sends signals to the cortex, and then the cortex sends signals to the amygdala, causing anxiety. One is raw, unprocessed data, which is association and pairing based, and the other is processed data, which is purely thought based. Exposure therapy is an excellent way to rewire the amygdala and turn the dial down on anxiety. Exposure therapy involves presenting stimuli that elicit anxiety purposely and having no negative consequence associated with that experience except the anxiety itself. Having gone through a few of these experiences for each trigger that you experience can rewire the amygdala and eliminate those triggers and reduce your anxiety through neuroplasticity. This technique is what I did for my anxiety, which helped the most. I purposely put myself in the very situations that used to cause anxiety and rode through the experience over and over. Each time I had less and less anxiety until that association was no longer a trigger. The trick is to know that you must write it out rather than fight it. You must go with the flow rather than escape it. Once you go through that experience, it reduces the anxiety the next time around. Each time you avoid or fight or try to find an escape, the anxiety will get stronger and stronger because it's association and pairing based. It'll get stronger associated with that particular experience. Whenever I would try to fight the anxiety, it would get worse, causing even more anxiety. And then I would try to fight it again and again. And it would just create this vicious cycle of anxiety, fighting, and more anxiety, more fighting, more anxiety. It just wreaked havoc. It made me drive to the ER several times. But once I was able to cope with the anxiety and learn how to write it out, not only did I have to not go to the ER, the anxiety was manageable to the point where, over time, it got smaller and smaller, weaker and weaker, and I was able to cope really well. And I started to trust this process and this therapy as well as my instincts. It overall made me a stronger person, happier person, and worry-free person. I obviously combined this therapy with a healthy lifestyle, which helped me speed up the healing process. Another thing that prevents exposure therapy from working properly and prevents the amygdala from getting trained properly, or prevents the brain from reaping the benefits of brain plasticity or neuroplasticity and rewiring, is substance abuse, benzodiazepines, and alcohol. Those things will never help cure or relieve your anxiety. The crazy thing is that many people don't realize this. Doctors are prescribing benzodiazepines to patients with anxiety, and both not realizing this makes it worse. The benzos, they block the amygdala from realizing it needs to face the anxiety. The medicine just blocks the amygdala, not allowing rewiring to take place at all. It kind of just goes over that, skips that process. The same thing happens with alcohol. If you use depressants to get past anxiety, it's only temporary. Plus, it wreaks a lot of havoc on our body. We are actually just prolonging the ability to heal and create a temporary fix that lasts for a short amount of time, and then we're faced with all this pressure again. So we need to know that the amygdala learns by pairings and associations. It's not logical. It's the part of the reptilian brain. Therefore, it can't decipher good from bad or dangerous from safe. If a safe situation caused a traumatic experience, then the amygdala will register it as a dangerous situation, and this is what we need to rewire. These potentially dangerous situations, experiences, and other things and feelings is what causes anxiety triggers. The language of the amygdala is alarm response, alarm response. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response that we hear so much about these days. Many of us who have anxiety have overly sensitive amygdalas. The amygdala can pair smells, visions, tastes, touches, sounds, and even events with negative situations. It uses our senses to create a positive or negative situation. These associations drove me crazy. This is what happened to me when I was going through my extreme anxiety for a few months. Almost everything became a trigger because I didn't know where the anxiety was coming from. Every time I felt anxious, I would hyperventilate. I couldn't breathe properly. It was horrible. It's like a fish out of water. Then my amygdala started associating random experiences with anxiety because those experiences would overlap. So for example, if I drank coffee and didn't feel any anxiety, but then felt the anxiety while walking down, let's say, the cleaning aisle at a store, You know how there's chemicals everywhere in the cleaning out? It kind of smells like chemical fumes. I would associate my anxiety with those chemical fumes more than the coffee, even though the coffee is what really caused the anxiety in the first place. So my amygdala would associate that with the smell instead of the actual thing. So it was the smells of the chemicals that the amygdala paired the association with, and each time a similar smell occurred, whether it was at home, like a piece of soap, or at a gas station, like gasoline, boom, hyperventilation and anxiety cycle, hyperventilation and anxiety cycle, even if the coffee wasn't involved. Another example is if I was feeling the hyperventilation and anxiety while eating a certain food, because that happened while eating certain foods as well, I would associate the anxiety with all or some of the ingredients in that particular dish. I would start analyzing every single ingredient. Then I started reading all the ingredients on every single thing and avoiding what I thought it might be. Like all those big words that you see you can't pronounce on the back of certain labels. Well, I became insanely focused on reading all of those labels and avoiding a bunch of different types of foods. I even switched my food to just complete whole foods that had no alien ingredients in it, just to be sure that I know exactly what I'm eating, so that maybe I don't get that anxiety. Well, I eat like that for the most part now, but I don't sit there reading all the back of every single food item all the time now. It was literally driving me insane, not knowing what was causing me to always hyperventilate. I literally paired every single type of sense with my anxiety until I was able to use process of elimination to get to where I am now. It was a long and arduous journey. But now I'm sure that only one thing was the root of all evil when it comes to my anxiety. My past history of alcohol use literally was the main thing. And then using benzos to get off of alcohol at certain times. And then the trauma associated with that and the negative thinking were definitely the culprits. When I stopped drinking, I got what is known as post-acute withdrawal symptoms, which can last up to a whole year or more, depending on how severely you were drinking. It actually affected my ability to eat food without anxiety. It affected my ability to smell certain smells without anxiety, to hear loud sounds like a baby crying without getting anxiety, or drink caffeine, even small amounts of caffeine I couldn't handle without hyperventilating. Every single thing almost made me hyperventilate. All of these things became extremely intolerable. But I have so much control over this now that I'm really grateful that I was able to narrow it down to the exact causes. You may not be going through the same thing with post-acute withdrawal, but your anxiety could be very similar. In fact, your anxiety could be due to something completely different, like environmental factors, epigenetics, trauma, or something else, but it could have similar symptoms as I did. So we know that exposure to anxiety trigger with positive outcomes resets the amygdala. Great, sign me up, right? Well, we need to be cautious about these exposure therapies. Best way to combine them is with a therapist's advice, and make sure you rule out any other possible issues in the body that you could be experiencing by getting a physical, a blood test, and talking to a psychiatrist first. Once all of that is ruled out, you can try these natural things that worked with me. What I did for myself to train my amygdala is I started very slow. I first learned everything I needed to know about my anxiety. Then when I learned about exposure, I didn't jump into it all at once. For example, if I had gotten anxiety eating a certain food, I would just take a bite of that and then walk away, and then come back and take a bite and then walk away and see how that felt. If I was feeling less anxious, I knew that it was working. Another example is if I was feeling anxious while driving a far distance, I would drive half the distance, come back, drive the full distance another day, and then come back again. So I took these exposure therapies in small steps to conquer the triggers. Some other things that can help activate the parasympathetic nervous system are breathing exercises, 20 minutes of exercise walking or cardio or muscle training or all. 8 hours of sleep and a healthy diet. We'll discuss all of these techniques and their benefits in detail in future videos. I hope you like this video. I just wanted to say that I'm not a medical doctor, so if you'd like medical advice, please see a psychiatrist or a medical doctor to get medical advice. Thank you. If you liked this video and you felt like the information provided in here taught you something or benefited you in any way, please give it a like. Please share with others so that they can also feel like it can help them. And please subscribe. Thank you so much. See you next time.